Hashtag humans walk away from peace talks. Story Part 1. The massive conference hall on Nexus Prime stretched for nearly a kilometer in every direction. Its crystalline walls reflected the light of 3 suns, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the polished floors. Representatives from across the Galactic Empire had gathered here for what many believed would be a historic moment: the formal integration of humanity into the Empire's fold. Admiral Sarah Chun stood at the human delegation's table, her dark uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by the other species. Behind her, 12 other humans sat quietly, their faces calm, but their eyes alert. They had traveled here from Earth after months of preliminary negotiations, hoping to find a place for their species in the vast galactic community. The HFY delegation occupied the central position, as befitted the Empire's ruling species. Their tall, insectoid forms clicked and chittered among themselves as they reviewed the final terms. Ambassador Zethka, their chief negotiator, rose on his 6 legs and gestured with his primary arms toward the humans. "The terms are generous," Zethka announced, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's translation system. "Humanity will be granted protected status within the Empire. Your worlds will be safe from external threats. Your people will have access to galactic technology and trade networks." Admiral Chen nodded respectfully. "We appreciate the offer, Ambassador. However, we'd like to review the specific details of this protected status." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the HFY delegation. Zethka's mandibles clicked in a pattern that translated as mild condescension. "Of course, Admiral. Under protected status, human worlds will be governed by appointed Imperial administrators. This ensures proper integration with galactic law and customs. Your military forces will be disbanded, as the Empire provides all necessary protection. Human reproduction will be regulated to prevent overpopulation and resource strain." The translator paused as Zethka continued. "Your species will be assigned suitable work roles based on your physical and mental capabilities. Initial assessments suggest humans are well suited for agricultural labor, basic manufacturing, and some service positions. This arrangement has worked well for other protected species." Admiral Chun felt her jaw tighten, but her expression remained neutral. "I see. And what about human self-governance? Our existing political systems?" "Unnecessary complications," replied Councillor Vextra, another HFY representative. "Protected species have no need for such burdens. The Empire's administrative system is far more efficient than the chaotic governments your species has developed." Dr. James Hartley, the human delegation's chief anthropologist, leaned forward. "Ambassador, you mentioned other protected species. Might we speak with representatives from some of these worlds to better understand how this arrangement works in practice?" Another chittering sound passed through the alien delegates. This time it was clearly amusement. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Zethka said. "Protected species don't typically engage in diplomatic activities. Such matters are beyond their scope of responsibility." Admiral Chun exchanged glances with her team. The implications were becoming clear, and if we were to decline this generous offer, the atmosphere in the hall shifted noticeably. The Zephyrian delegation, with their crystalline bodies refracting light in sharp patterns, seemed to pulse with interest. The massive Gorlak representatives leaned forward on their tree trunk legs, their deep voices rumbling in what sounded like anticipation. "That would be unfortunate," Zethka said carefully. "You see, Admiral, your species has already attracted considerable attention throughout the galaxy. Your rapid technological development, your expansion beyond your homeworld, your military capabilities. These things concern many of our member species. The Empire exists to maintain order and stability." General Clix of the Gorlak delegation stood, his massive form casting a shadow across the human table. When he spoke, his voice was like distant thunder. "Human aggression is already documented. Your wars, your weapons, your expansion, all evidence of a dangerous species. The Empire offers protection from yourselves as much as for you. We've had no hostile contact with any galactic species, Dr. Sarah Kim, the human delegation's xenobiologist, pointed out. Our expansion has been peaceful, focused on uninhabited worlds. For now, hissed Esistera, the Vextary representative. Her serpentine form coiled and uncoiled as she spoke. But your species reproduces rapidly. Your technology advances quickly. Without proper oversight, you could become a threat to galactic stability. Admiral Chun stood slowly. I think we need to take a recess to discuss these terms with our government. Certainly, Zethka agreed. You have one standard galactic day to consider our offer. I should mention, however, that this is the only offer that will be made. The Empire has been unanimous in its decision regarding humanity's future status. As the human delegation gathered in their assigned quarters, the weight of the situation settled over them. The rooms were comfortable, but clearly designed for temporary use. No windows looked out onto the planet's surface, and the doors, while unlocked, had guards posted nearby. We're not guests here, observed Captain Maria Santos, the delegation's military advisor. We're barely above prisoners. Admiral Chun activated her personal communicator, but found only static. They're jamming our signals. We can't contact Earth directly. Dr. Hartley pulled out a tablet and began reviewing their extensive notes on galactic species. This protected status. I've been analyzing the linguistic patterns and how they describe it. The translation software is sanitizing what they're actually saying. What do you mean? Admiral Chen asked. When Zethka talks about protected species, the literal translation will be closer to managed livestock or contained populations. The Empire doesn't see these species as junior partners. They see them as pets at best, resources at worst. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Kim was the first to speak. The reproductive controls they mentioned, that's not about population management. That's about breeding programs. And the work assignments, Captain Santos added grimly. Agricultural labor, basic manufacturing, service positions. They're describing slave labor. Admiral Chen began pacing. The question is, what are our options? They've made it clear this is the only offer we'll get. There's something else, Dr. Hartley said, still studying his notes. I've been observing the other delegations. The power dynamic here isn't what it appears to be. The Kethvar present themselves as the ruling species, but watch how the Zephyrians and Gorlak interact with them. This is more like a triumvirate with the Kethvar as spokesbeings. Does that matter? Asked Dr. Kim. It might. It suggests the Empire is more fragile than they want us to believe. They need unanimous agreement to take major actions. That's why they're so insistent on us accepting this offer. Any resistance could expose cracks in their unity. Admiral Chun stopped pacing. What kind of resistance? The kind that leaves, Dr. Hartley said quietly. They expect us to either submit or fight. They're prepared for both scenarios. What they're not prepared for is us simply walking away. Walk away to where? Captain Santos asked. They control this entire region of space. Do they? Admiral Chun mused. How many species have actually tried to leave? If their protected species are as controlled as we think, they wouldn't even have the capability to attempt it. Dr. Kim was already pulling up star charts on her tablet. Our ships are still in the orbital dock. If we could reach them, it's not just about reaching them, Admiral Chen said. It's about what message we send. If we fight our way out, we validate their claims about human aggression. But if we simply leave, we prove that their system isn't as absolute as they claim, Dr. Hartley finished. We show that there are alternatives to submission or conquest. The discussion continued through the night. They analyzed every detail of their situation, every possible escape route, every potential consequence of their actions. By morning, they had reached a consensus. When the conference reconvened, the great hall buzzed with anticipation. The alien delegates had clearly spent the time preparing for humanity's capitulation. Additional security forces were visible around the chamber, and the human delegation noted that their seating had been subtly repositioned to be surrounded by other delegations. Ambassador Zethka rose with obvious satisfaction. Admiral Chun, I trust your government has reached a decision regarding our generous offer. Admiral Chen stood, her posture straight and confident. We have, Ambassador. After careful consideration, we must respectfully decline your offer of protected status. A wave of surprised chittering, hissing, and rumbling passed through the assembled delegates. This was clearly not the expected response. I'm afraid I don't understand, Zethka said, his mandibles clicking in agitation. Perhaps you misunderstood the terms. Let me clarify. This is not a negotiation. The Empire has determined that humanity requires protective oversight for the safety of all galactic species. We understand the terms perfectly, Ambassador, Admiral Chun replied calmly. We also understand that the Galactic Empire, despite its impressive scope, does not have jurisdiction over sovereign human space. We therefore withdraw from these proceedings and will be departing immediately. The hall erupted in chaos. Multiple alien languages filled the air as delegates spoke over each other. General Clix slammed a massive fist on his table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. You cannot simply leave, Sistera hissed, her serpentine form rising to its full height. The galaxy has spoken. Human aggression must be contained. When not being aggressive, Dr. Hartley said, rising beside Admiral Chun. We're simply exercising our right to self-determination. If the Empire wishes to maintain its principles of order and stability, surely it respects the sovereign rights of species who choose not to participate. Councillor Vextra's voice cut through the noise. Your rights extend only as far as this Empire allows. You are within our sphere of influence. Your ships will be impounded, and you will accept protective status whether you agree or not. Admiral Chun smiled, a cold, calculating expression that made several nearby delegates shift uncomfortably. I'm afraid that would be a declaration of war against a sovereign human government, Counselor. Are you certain the Empire wishes to take that position? Va? Zethka's laugh was a harsh chittering sound. Admiral, you represent a single species on a handful of worlds. The Empire spans thousands of systems and hundreds of species. What possible threat could you pose? Probably none, Admiral Chen admitted. But the precedent would be interesting, wouldn't it? The mighty Galactic Empire, forced to use military action against a peaceful delegation that simply wanted to leave. Other species might wonder what that says about the Empire's respect for sovereignty. They might wonder what other rights the Empire might decide to revoke. The chamber fell silent. Dr. Hartley stepped forward. The Empire presents itself as a benevolent force for order and stability. Using force against those who peacefully decline to participate would undermine that image considerably. Other member species might begin to question whether their own membership is truly voluntary. General Clix rose to his full, intimidating height. Are you threatening the Empire, human? Not at all, Admiral Chen replied. We're simply leaving. Our ships will depart this system within the hour. We'll return to human space and have no further contact with the Empire unless invited. If the Empire chooses to interpret peaceful withdrawal as a threat, that says more about the Empire than it does about humanity. The alien delegates began speaking among themselves in urgent, heated tones. The translation system couldn't keep up with the multiple conversations happening simultaneously, but the tone was clear: confusion, anger, and growing concern. Ambassador Zethka called for order. You cannot simply walk away from the galaxy's decision, Admiral. The matter of human integration has been settled by unanimous vote of the Empire. A vote in which humanity had no participation and no representation, Dr. Kim pointed out. The Empire decided our future without consulting us. We're under no obligation to accept that decision. Your obligations are determined by galactic law, Sistera hissed. Whose galactic law? Admiral Chen asked. We never agreed to be bound by the Empire's legal framework. We came here in good faith, hoping to find common ground for peaceful coexistence. Instead, we found a system that demands submission without offering genuine partnership. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with delegates from multiple species. We wish the Empire well in its endeavors. We hope that other species find satisfaction in the protection and guidance it offers. But humanity chooses a different path. The human delegation began gathering their materials. The simple action sent shock waves through the chamber. No one had ever simply left before. Wait! ZVA's voice cracked with something approaching panic. You cannot simply abandon the protection of the Empire. The galaxy is dangerous. There are threats you cannot imagine. Admiral Chen paused. Then, we'll face those threats as free beings, Ambassador. Win or lose, succeed or fail, we'll do so as ourselves, not as someone else's protected property. As the humans walked toward the chamber's exit, security forces moved to block their path. The tension in the room became electric. Admiral Chen stopped in front of the lead security officer, a HFY warrior in ceremonial armor. Are you detaining us against our will? The warrior looked uncertainly toward the delegation tables, clearly waiting for orders that weren't coming. The alien leadership seemed paralyzed by this unprecedented situation. Let them go. General Clix rumbled finally. Let them see what the galaxy holds for unprotected species. They'll return begging for the Empire's protection soon enough. But as the humans walked out of the chamber, many of the alien delegates noticed something that troubled them deeply. The humans weren't walking like beings facing an uncertain and dangerous future. They walked like beings who had just won something important. Admiral Chen led her team through the station's corridors toward the docking bay. Behind them, they could hear the rising voices of heated debate from the conference chamber. The Empire was discovering that their unanimous system had a critical flaw. It only worked as long as everyone agreed to participate. As they boarded their shuttle for the trip to their ships, Dr. Hartley looked back at the massive station. Do you think we've made the right choice? Admiral Chen started the engines. I think we've made the only choice we could live with, James. Everything else comes after that. The shuttle pulled away from Nexus Prime's docking bay, carrying the first beings in galactic memory who had simply walked away from the Empire's protection. Behind them, the greatest political crisis in the Empire's history was just beginning. The Empire had expected submission or resistance. They had prepared for war or peaceful integration. They had not prepared for indifference. And as the human ships engaged their faster-than-light drives and disappeared into the void, the alien delegates were left to grapple with a question that threatened the very foundation of their civilization. If the Empire's protection could be declined, what did that say about the Empire itself? In the depths of space, Admiral Chen looked at the star charts showing the route back to human space. They had 6 weeks of travel ahead of them, 6 weeks to prepare for whatever consequences their decision would bring. But for the first time since arriving in this region of space, she felt like her species had a future worth fighting for. They were free, whatever that might cost them. The galaxy was about to learn what that meant. #humans walk away from peace talks. Story Part 2, the emergency session of the Imperial Council convened 12 hours after the humans departed Nexus Prime. The massive chamber on the Empire's capital world of Cathera buzzed with tension as representatives from every major species gathered to address what many were calling the first true crisis of the galactic government. Supreme Counselor Thexa stood at the center of the circular chamber, her ancient form supported by mechanical aids that helped her move despite her centuries of age. As the eldest HFY in the Empire and architect of the current galactic order, her word carried more weight than any other being in known space. The humans have committed an unprecedented act, she began, her voice amplified throughout the chamber. They have rejected the Empire's lawful authority and departed without accepting their assigned status. Council Speaker Vorgith of the Gorlak delegation slammed his massive fist on his speaking podium. This is clear defiance of galactic law. They must be brought back and forced to accept protective status. With what justification? The question came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Lyrian of the Altari Union, one of the Empire's longest-standing member species. They committed no crimes. They made no threats. They simply chose not to participate in our system. A wave of surprised murmurs passed through the chamber. The Altari were known for their unwavering loyalty to the Empire. having been among the first species to join when the Galactic government was formed. Counselor Zeth Ka, still agitated from his encounter with the humans, rose to respond. Ambassador Lyrian, the humans' very existence poses a threat to galactic stability. Their rapid technological advancement, their military capabilities, their unrestricted population growth. These factors require imperial oversight regardless of their personal preferences. So we are to imprison species for crimes they might commit? Asked Lyrian. For potential threats rather than actual ones? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. For centuries, the Empire had justified its expansion by promising protection and stability to new species. The underlying assumption had always been that such protection was desirable, that species would naturally want to join the galactic community. Counselor Cisses Vex of the Vexthery Collective spoke next. Her serpentine form coiled in apparent agitation. The precedent is dangerous. If species can simply refuse imperial authority, our entire system becomes questionable. Perhaps that's not entirely wrong, came another surprising voice. Elder Foe of the crystalline consciousness, a Zephyrian whose crystalline body refracted light in complex patterns, rarely spoke in council sessions. When they did, others listened. Explain yourself, Elder Supreme Counselor Texa commanded. The humans presented us with a question we have never faced, Foe said, their voice creating harmonic resonances that the translation system struggled to convey. They asked, in essence, whether our protection is truly protection if it cannot be refused. They questioned whether our order is truly just if it cannot tolerate alternatives. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Multiple delegates began speaking at once, their various languages creating a cacophony that the translation system couldn't parse. Order. Fexier's voice cut through the chaos. We will address each concern methodically. General Crix of the Gorlak military forces stood to address the council. The practical matter remains simple. The humans cannot be allowed to exist as an independent force. Their technology, while primitive by our standards, is advancing rapidly. Their military doctrine is unlike anything we have encountered. If they're allowed to develop unchecked, they could become a genuine threat. What kind of threat? Asked Ambassador Nethin of the Peaceful Gathering, a coalition of smaller species. They have made no aggressive moves against any galactic civilization. They haven't had the opportunity, Crix replied. But examine their history, Ambassador. Constant warfare among their own species. Nuclear weapons deployed against their own kind. Ecological destruction of their homeworld. These beings are fundamentally violent. Dr. Veltam, the Council's chief xenopsychologist, accessed her data files. If I may present analysis of human behavioral patterns, she said, her mechanical translation unit converting her species' complex chemical communications into standard galactic language. The chamber's main display activated, showing detailed psychological profiles of humanity. Human aggression patterns are indeed well documented, she began. However, they differ significantly from those of other species we have encountered. The display showed comparative charts between humans and various other species. Most aggressive species direct their hostility outward, toward other species, toward external threats. Humans are unique in that their primary aggression has historically been directed inward, toward their own kind. How is that relevant? General Crix demanded. Because it suggests that human aggression is not expansionist in nature, Dr. Veltam explained. Their conflicts have primarily been over resources, territory, and ideology among their own populations. This is very different from species that show aggression toward other life forms. She manipulated the display to show human expansion patterns. Observe their colonization efforts. They have deliberately avoided systems with any signs of intelligent life. Their expansion has been careful, methodical, and specifically designed to avoid contact with other species until they felt ready for such contact. They were preparing for conquest, Cissis Vex hissed, or for peaceful contact, Ambassador Lyrian countered. Their delegation was smaller than protocol suggested. They brought no military escort beyond minimal security, and they showed genuine interest in learning about our customs and laws. These are not the actions of a species preparing for war. Supreme Counselor Thexie raised a manipulator arm for silence. The analysis is interesting, but irrelevant. The humans have rejected imperial authority. This cannot be allowed to stand. Why not? Elder Fotha asked simply. The question sent another shock through the chamber. Because, Thexie replied carefully, the Empire exists to maintain order and stability throughout the galaxy. Species that operate outside our authority create uncertainty, and uncertainty leads to chaos. Does it? Ambassador Lyrian asked. Or does forced compliance create the very instability we seek to avoid? For the first time in living memory, Supreme Counselor Thexie seemed uncertain. The Empire had been built on the assumption that galactic civilization required central authority to prevent the kind of conflicts that had plagued individual worlds throughout history. The idea that species might coexist without such authority challenged the Empire's fundamental justification for existence. We are straying from practical concerns, General Crix announced. Regardless of philosophy, we cannot allow an advanced species to exist outside Imperial oversight. The humans must be brought into compliance. How do you propose to accomplish that? Asked Ambassador Nethan. They have returned to their own territory, which is outside our current sphere of influence. Any military action would require us to invade sovereign space. Sovereign by whose authority? Tonchilor Zetka demanded. The galaxy recognizes only Imperial sovereignty. The galaxy recognizes Imperial sovereignty over member species and territory, Elder Fotha corrected. The humans were never members, and their territory was never claimed by the Empire. The legal implications were staggering. The Empire had always operated under the assumption that species would either join willingly or be integrated for their own protection. The possibility of a species simply existing outside the imperial system had never been seriously considered. Dr. Veltam accessed additional files. I have been reviewing our historical records. In the early days of the Empire, several species initially declined membership. However, they were all eventually integrated through a combination of economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, and, in some cases, military intervention. What happened to them? Ambassador Lyrian asked. They became protected species, Dr. Veltam replied quietly. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Empire's protected species weren't volunteers who had sought imperial guidance. They were conquered peoples whose independence had been systematically eliminated. The humans are different, Dr. Veltam continued. Their technology is more advanced than any species we encountered during the expansion period. Their territory is more extensive, and, most importantly, they have demonstrated capabilities we did not anticipate. What capabilities? General Crix asked. They walked away, Elder Fotha said simply. No species has ever successfully walked away from the Empire. They identified the fundamental weakness in our system. It only works if everyone agrees to participate. Supreme Counselor Thexie turned to her military advisors. General Crix, what would be required to bring the humans into compliance? The massive Gorlak consulted his tactical displays. Based on our intelligence, the humans possess approximately 57 inhabited worlds, with a total population exceeding 12 billion. Their military forces are smaller than ours, but employ technologies and tactics we have not previously encountered. He manipulated the chamber's main display to show human space. Their faster-than-light communication network allows near-instantaneous coordination across their entire territory. Their ships are heavily automated, allowing smaller crews to operate more efficiently. Most concerning, their weapons technology appears to prioritize efficiency over raw power. Meaning what exactly? Counselor SSS Vex asked. Meaning they build weapons designed to win wars, not to intimidate enemies, Crix replied grimly. Most Imperial weapons are designed for display, to demonstrate the Empire's overwhelming power and discourage resistance. Human weapons appear to be designed for actual combat effectiveness. The chamber stirred uneasily. The Empire's military doctrine had been built around the principle of overwhelming superiority, showing such massive force that enemies would surrender rather than fight. It had worked for centuries against less advanced species. Are you suggesting that humans could successfully resist Imperial authority? Thexia asked. I'm suggesting that the cost of forcing compliance could be higher than anticipated, Crix admitted. More importantly, any military action would validate human claims that the Empire uses force to compel membership. This could destabilize relationships with current member species. Ambassador Lyrian leaned forward. General, in your professional opinion, what would happen if the Empire launched a military campaign against the humans? Crix was quiet for a long moment. If the humans fought back, we would ultimately prevail through superior numbers. However, the conflict would likely be protracted and costly. More concerning is what happens afterward. Ulabere Texa commanded. The humans would become martyrs to every species that has ever questioned Imperial authority. Their resistance would demonstrate that alternatives to submission exist. Other species might begin to wonder if they, too, could simply walk away. The fear that had been building throughout the session crystallized. The Empire existed because member species believed it was their only option for safety and prosperity. If that belief was challenged, the entire system could unravel. Dr. Veltam added another disturbing element. Our psychological analysis suggests that humans would not surrender even if facing certain defeat. Their historical patterns show a willingness to fight to extinction rather than accept subjugation. A war with humans might result in complete genocide, which would create an even worse precedent, Elder Fotha observed. The empire that claims to protect all species would have exterminated one for refusing protection. The council session continued for hours, but no consensus emerged. Some delegates insisted that human defiance could not be tolerated. Others worried that military action would create more problems than it solved. A few even suggested that perhaps the Empire should consider allowing the humans to remain independent as an experiment in alternative governance. Finally, Supreme Counselor Thexia called for a recess. We will reconvene tomorrow to continue deliberations. In the meantime, I want complete intelligence reports on human capabilities and detailed analysis of potential consequences for any action we might take. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, small groups formed to continue discussions. The Empire's unity, which had seemed absolute for centuries, was showing cracks. Meanwhile, in human space, Admiral Chen's fleet had arrived at the Sol system to find Earth's government in emergency session. The news of their departure from the peace talks had reached home through quantum entanglement communication just hours before their arrival. President Elizabeth Harrison met personally with Admiral Chen in the underground command center beneath Geneva. The room was filled with Earth's top military and scientific advisors, all trying to assess their new situation. So, they're not coming after us immediately, President Harrison said after hearing Admiral Chen's full report. But they've made it clear they consider us a threat that needs to be controlled. That's correct, Madam President, Admiral Chen confirmed. The Empire has never encountered a species that simply refused their authority. They don't seem to know how to respond. General Patricia Rodriguez, Chief of Staff for Earth's United Military Command, studied the intelligence reports they had gathered. Their military technology is impressive, but it's designed for intimidation and crushing primitive opponents. Our systems are designed for actual warfare. Can we win if they decide to attack? The president asked directly. That depends on how you define winning, Rodriguez replied. Can we defeat their entire empire? No, their numbers are too great. Can we make them regret attacking us? Almost certainly. Dr. Michael Chong, Earth's leading xenobiologist, looked up from his analysis. There's something else to consider. The Empire's system depends on the belief that it's the only viable option for galactic civilization. If we can survive as an independent entity, we prove that alternatives exist. So our mere existence becomes a threat to their system, President Harrison mused. Exactly, Admiral Chen agreed. That's why I don't think they'll leave us alone indefinitely. But it's also why we might have more leverage than our size suggests. The president stood and walked to the large display showing the local galactic region. What are our options? We prepare for war while hoping for peace, Rodriguez said. We accelerate our defensive preparations, continue expanding our territory, and try to make contact with species that might be sympathetic to our situation. Are there any such species? The president asked. Dr. Chong consulted his files. Based on our observations at the peace talks, several Empire species seemed uncomfortable with their treatment of us. The Altari delegate actually defended our right to self-determination. The Zephyrian elder asked pointed questions about the Empire's authority. Those could be potential allies, Admiral Chen noted. If the Empire does decide to take action against us, having even a few Imperial species voice dissent could be valuable. President Harrison made her decision. We'll pursue a dual strategy. General Rodriguez, I want our military prepared for any possible attack. Expand the fleet, improve our defenses, and develop new weapons and tactics. Dr. Chong, I want you to analyze every scrap of intelligence we have about Imperial species. Find potential sympathizers and figure out how to contact them. She turned to Admiral Chun. And I want you to prepare for a very different kind of mission. If we're going to survive this, we need to understand our enemies better than they understand us. What kind of mission? Admiral Chen asked. The kind where we stop running away and start engaging on our own terms, the president replied. If the Empire wants to know what humans are capable of, perhaps it's time we showed them. In the depths of space between the Empire and human territory, automated monitoring stations detected the signatures of ships moving in both directions. The galaxy was mobilizing, and the first war between truly equal technological civilizations in centuries was becoming increasingly inevitable. Neither side fully understood yet what they were facing. The Empire had never encountered a species that could resist their authority. Humans had never faced a threat that couldn't be defeated through determination and ingenuity. The collision of these worldviews would reshape the galaxy in ways neither side could imagine. Humans walk away from peace talks. Story part 3. 6 months after the failed peace talks, the cracks in the Galactic Empire were becoming impossible to ignore. What had started as a simple question about human integration had evolved into a crisis that threatened the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. Ambassador Lyrian stood in her private chambers on the Altari homeworld of Veltanus, reviewing the latest intelligence reports with growing alarm. Through her floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the crystal spires of her world's capital city, but her mind was focused on events light years away. Her aide, Counselor Jethra, entered carrying encrypted data tablets. The reports from the border regions are troubling, Ambassador. 3 more species have formally requested clarification of their membership status. Lyrian reviewed the documents with mounting concern. The Valish Consortium, the Independent Traders Union, and the Stellar Collective all had sent formal inquiries to the Imperial Council asking about the specific terms of their membership and what, if anything, would happen if they chose to withdraw. The humans have been busy, she observed. Indeed, Jethra agreed. Intelligence suggests they've made contact with at least 17 species within the Empire's sphere of influence. They're not recruiting allies so much as asking questions. What kind of questions? The dangerous kind, Ambassador. Questions about choice. About whether membership in the Empire is truly voluntary. About alternatives to the current system. Lyrian set down the tablets and moved to her window. The Altari had been among the Empire's earliest and most enthusiastic members, believing that galactic unity represented the natural evolution of civilization. But the human situation had forced her to examine assumptions she had never questioned before. Jethra, in all our time as Imperial members, have we ever seriously considered what would happen if we chose to leave? Her aide's crystalline features flickered with surprise. A physiological response the Altari had never quite learned to control. Ambassador, why would we consider such a thing? The Empire has provided us with protection, trade opportunities, cultural exchange. Has it? Lyrian interrupted. Or have we provided those things to ourselves, with the Empire taking credit for our cooperation? Before Jethra could respond, their communication system activated with an urgent priority signal. The holographic image of Supreme Counselor Thexia appeared, her ancient features set in grim determination. Ambassador Lyrian, you will report to Kethera immediately for an emergency council session. The situation with the humans has escalated. The transmission ended without elaboration, leaving Lyrian to wonder what new development had pushed the Empire toward open crisis. Within hours, she was aboard her diplomatic transport, heading toward the imperial capital with a sense of foreboding that grew stronger with each light year. When she arrived at the Imperial Council chambers, the atmosphere was unlike anything she had experienced in decades of diplomatic service. The usual formal protocols had been abandoned in favor of urgent, heated discussions. Multiple species were speaking at once, and the translation systems were struggling to keep pace with the emotional intensity of the debates. Supreme Counselor Thexia called for order as Lyrian took her place at the Altari delegation's position. Council members, we face an unprecedented crisis. 3 days ago, human vessels appeared in the neutral zone and made contact with representatives of the Valish Consortium. The chamber erupted in angry voices. The neutral zone was a buffer region between Imperial space and the unknown territories beyond, established by treaty to prevent conflicts with potential hostile species. No one was supposed to operate there without Imperial authorization. General Crix stood, his massive form radiating barely controlled fury. This is a clear violation of galactic law. The humans have entered restricted space and are attempting to suborn Imperial member species. What was the nature of this contact? Elder Foe, they asked, their crystalline form refracting the chamber's light in agitated patterns. Thexia activated the chamber's main display, showing recorded communications from the encounter. The humans requested a meeting with Valish leadership to discuss what they called alternatives to Imperial membership. The recording played, showing a human diplomat speaking calmly to a group of surprised Valish officials. Admiral Chen's voice was unmistakable as she explained humanity's position. We're not asking you to join us or to leave the Empire, Chen was saying. We're simply demonstrating that other options exist. The Empire presents itself as the only path to galactic civilization, but that's not necessarily true. Species can cooperate without surrendering their sovereignty. The Valish delegation leader, a being whose species resembled crystalline trees with mobile branches, responded with obvious confusion. But without Imperial protection, how do you maintain security? How do you resolve conflict between species? How do you coordinate trade and communication? The same way species did before the Empire existed, Chen replied. Through direct negotiation, mutual agreements, and voluntary cooperation. The Empire didn't create civilization. It imposed a particular form of it. The recording showed more discussion, with the humans carefully avoiding any suggestion that the Valish should leave the Empire immediately. Instead, they focused on philosophical questions about sovereignty and self-determination. As the recording ended, Counselor Zethka rose in obvious agitation. This is clear sedition. The humans are attempting to undermine Imperial authority by spreading dangerous ideas. What ideas? Ambassador Lyrian asked. That species have the right to choose their own path. That cooperation can exist without coercion. Those ideas threaten the stability of our entire system. Zethka snapped. If species believe they can exist independently, the Empire loses its ability to maintain order. Perhaps, Elder Foe said quietly, that tells us more about the Empire than about the ideas themselves. The statement sent shock waves through the chamber. For a Zephyrian elder to question Imperial authority was almost unprecedented. Supreme Counselor Thexia moved quickly to regain control. The practical matter remains that humans are operating within our sphere of influence, and attempting to destabilize our member species. This cannot be tolerated. What action has the Valish Consortium taken? Asked Ambassador Nethan of the peaceful gathering. They have requested a full review of their membership terms, HFY admitted reluctantly. They want to understand what obligations they have to the Empire and what rights they retain as sovereign beings. The implications were staggering. If one species began questioning their membership terms, others would follow. The Empire's authority had always been based on the assumption that it was absolute and unquestionable. General Crix slammed his fist on his podium. We must take military action against the humans immediately. Every day we delay, more species will be infected by their dangerous ideas. Military action based on what justification? Ambassador Lyrian demanded. They have committed no acts of aggression. They have violated no treaties. They have simply exercised their right to free speech in neutral space. Their very existence is a threat to galactic stability. Crix roared. So we are to exterminate species for existing? Lyrian shot back. For refusing to submit to our authority? The argument escalated rapidly, with multiple delegates shouting across the chamber. The unity that had defined the Empire for centuries was fracturing before their eyes. Dr. Veltam, who had been quietly analyzing data throughout the session, stood to address the council. I have completed a comprehensive analysis of recent communications throughout the Empire, she announced, her mechanical translation unit conveying her words with clinical precision. The results are troubling. Since the humans' departure from the peace talks, we have detected a significant increase in discussions about imperial authority among member species. Key phrases include questions about voluntary membership, requests for clarification of rights, and speculation about alternatives to the current system. She manipulated the chamber's display to show statistical analyses. Most concerning, these discussions are not centered on any particular region or species type. They are occurring throughout the Empire, among both recent and founding members. Supreme Counselor HFY studied the data with growing alarm. Are you saying the humans' actions have triggered empire-wide questioning of our authority? I am saying that the humans have revealed questions that already existed, Dr. Veltam replied. Their departure from the peace talks didn't create doubt about imperial authority. It simply made existing doubts visible. The chamber fell silent as the delegates absorbed this revelation. The Empire had assumed that member species were content with their status, that the protection and stability offered by central authority was universally desired. The possibility that significant numbers of species might prefer independence had never been seriously considered. Elder Fotha spoke into the silence. Perhaps the question we should be asking is not how to stop the humans, but whether the empire they represent is fundamentally more stable than the one we have created. What do you mean? HFY asked. The humans have demonstrated that species can cooperate without surrendering sovereignty. If this is true, then our system, which demands such surrender, may be unnecessarily restrictive. Species that choose to cooperate are likely to be more committed and reliable than species that are forced to comply. The philosophical implications were staggering. If voluntary cooperation was indeed more stable than imposed authority, then the Empire's fundamental structure was not only unnecessary, but counterproductive. Counselor SSS Vex of the Vex-3 Collective coiled in agitation. You suggest we simply abandon the system that has brought peace to the galaxy for centuries. I suggest we consider whether that peace came from our system or despite it, Fotha replied. The humans have forced us to confront a question we have avoided. Does our authority exist because it is necessary, or because we have convinced ourselves it is necessary? The debate continued for hours, but no resolution emerged. The Empire was facing its first true existential crisis, and there were no established procedures for addressing it. Meanwhile, in human space, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. Admiral Chun stood on the observation deck of the UES Endeavour, humanity's most advanced exploration vessel, watching as representatives from 6 different species gathered in the ship's main conference room. None of these species were official representatives of their governments. They were scientists, philosophers, traders, and other individuals who had accepted discreet invitations to discuss alternatives to the imperial system. The meetings were carefully structured to avoid any appearance of sedition or rebellion. Dr. Sarakim briefed Chun on the participants. The Valish representative is Dr. Kethvar. Yes, same species name as the imperial rulers, but no relation. She's a political theorist who has been studying human governmental systems. The Altari representative is Professor Valen, a historian who specializes in pre-imperial civilization. We also have voices from the Traders Union, the Stellar Collective, and 2 species I've never heard of before. What's their interest level? Chen asked. High but cautious. They all want to understand how human society functions without central authority. They're particularly interested in how we resolve conflicts and coordinate large-scale activities. Chen nodded. Let's show them. The conference that followed was unlike any diplomatic meeting in galactic history. Instead of formal presentations and negotiated agreements, it was a genuine exchange of ideas about governance, cooperation, and the nature of civilization itself. Dr. Kethvar of the Valish Consortium asked the most pointed questions. Your human governmental systems appear to be based on the principle that authority derives from consent of the governed. How does this work when dealing with species that have fundamentally different values and objectives? Admiral Chun considered the question carefully. It doesn't always work, she admitted. We have conflicts, disagreements, and sometimes complete breakdowns in cooperation. But we found that temporary conflicts between free entities are less destructive than permanent oppression of unwilling subjects. Professor Velen leaned forward with interest. Can you elaborate on that distinction? When free entities disagree, they typically fight until one side wins or both sides reach a compromise they can live with, Chen explained. But when oppressed subjects rebel, they often fight until the entire system collapses. The stakes are different. The Altari historian accessed his data files. Our records show that pre-imperial civilization was characterized by constant warfare and instability. The Empire ended those conflicts. Did it? Dr. James Hartley interjected. Or did it suppress them temporarily while creating the conditions for a much larger and more devastating conflict? The question sparked intense discussion among the alien representatives. Many had never considered that the Empire's imposed peace might simply be delaying rather than preventing conflict. Over the course of 3 days, the humans shared detailed information about their governmental systems, economic models, and conflict resolution mechanisms. They demonstrated how multiple species could cooperate while maintaining their independence, how trade could flourish without central control, and how disputes could be resolved through negotiation rather than imposed authority. Most importantly, they showed that alternatives to the imperial system were not only possible, but potentially more stable and prosperous for all participants. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Kethvar made a statement that would be remembered as a turning point in galactic history. You have demonstrated something we thought impossible, she said. You have shown that civilization can exist without empire. This changes everything. When the alien representatives returned to their respective territories, they carried with them more than just information about human society. They carried proof that the Empire's claims of necessity were false, that species could choose their own path without sacrificing safety or prosperity. The Empire was about to discover that ideas could be more dangerous than any weapon. Back on Kethera, Supreme Counselor Thexia received reports of the human conference with growing alarm. Intelligence indicated that the participating species were sharing their new knowledge with others, creating a cascade of questioning that threatened to spread throughout Imperial space. For the first time in her long life, Thexia began to wonder if the empire she had helped build was sustainable. The humans had revealed a fundamental weakness in their system. It only worked as long as no one questioned it. And questioning once started was almost impossible to stop. The galaxy was changing, and the Empire's choice was becoming clear: evolve or face the same extinction they had threatened to impose on humanity. The irony was not lost on anyone paying attention. The species that had walked away from the peace talks had set in motion events that would determine whether peace in the galaxy would be maintained through choice or through force. And for the first time in centuries, the outcome was genuinely uncertain. #Humans walk away from peace talks. Story Part 4: The crisis reached its breaking point 18 months after the humans first walked away from the peace talks. What began as a diplomatic disagreement had evolved into the most serious challenge to galactic stability since the Empire's founding. Species throughout Imperial space were openly questioning the fundamental nature of their relationship with the central government, and the Empire's leadership was fracturing under the pressure of questions they had no answers for. The emergency had escalated beyond the Imperial Council's ability to manage through normal procedures. For the first time in over 3 centuries, the Empire had convened the Grand Assembly, a gathering of every species with Imperial membership, from the founding civilizations to the most recently integrated worlds. The massive amphitheater on Kethura had been expanded to accommodate representatives from over 400 species. The sight was magnificent and terrifying, the greatest gathering of intelligent life in galactic history, brought together by a crisis that threatened everything they had built together. Supreme Counselor Thexay stood at the center of the vast assembly, her ancient form seeming fragile against the backdrop of so many diverse life forms. When she spoke, her words were transmitted in over 200 languages simultaneously. "Fellow citizens of the galaxy," she began, "we face a threat unlike any in our long history. Not an external enemy seeking conquest, but an internal challenge to the very principles that have brought us peace and prosperity for centuries." The assembly stirred uneasily. Many of the representatives have been dealing with growing unrest on their home worlds as populations learned about the human alternative to Imperial membership. The species known as humanity has rejected our protection and guidance, Thexay continued. More dangerously, they have spread the idea that Imperial membership is optional, that species can exist independently without central authority. Ambassador Lyrian of the Altari sat with her delegation, watching the assembly's reaction with growing concern. Around her, she could see representatives from dozens of species exchanging meaningful glances, engaging in whispered conversations, and displaying the subtle signs of barely contained agitation that indicated deep philosophical divisions within the assembly. General Crix rose to address the gathering, his massive Gorlak form commanding attention through sheer physical presence. "The humans have made contact with 17 Imperial species," he announced. "They have shared detailed information about their governmental systems, their economic models, and their military capabilities. They are actively encouraging defection from the Empire." "Are they?" The question came from Ambassador Telquin of the Ethereal Collective, a species rarely heard from in galactic politics. "Or are they simply demonstrating that alternatives exist?" The distinction might have seemed minor to some, but its implications were enormous. Encouraging defection would be an act of aggression against the Empire. Demonstrating alternatives was simply the free exchange of information, something the Empire supposedly supported. Dr. Veltam, the Empire's chief xenopsychologist, stepped forward with her latest analysis. "I have completed a comprehensive psychological evaluation of the human approach to interspecies relations," she announced. "The results challenge our fundamental assumptions about civilization and cooperation." The Assembly's main display activated, showing complex behavioral charts and comparative analyses. "Human civilization is built on what they call competitive cooperation," Dr. Veltam explained. "Individual groups compete for resources and influence while simultaneously cooperating on shared challenges." The display showed examples of human international relations, economic systems, and conflict resolution. Most importantly, their system allows for disagreement without requiring dominance. Species can have fundamentally different values and still cooperate when their interests align. Counselor Vex coiled in apparent agitation. You describe chaos and instability. How can such a system maintain order? By accepting that perfect order is neither possible nor desirable, Dr. Veltam replied. Human systems are designed to be robust rather than efficient, flexible rather than rigid. They can adapt to changing circumstances without requiring complete restructuring. The implications were profound. The Empire had been built on the principle that galactic civilization required uniform standards, central authority, and absolute compliance. The human model suggested that diversity, autonomy, and voluntary cooperation might actually be more stable over time. Elder Foe of the Zephyrians rose to address the assembly. I would like to present a historical perspective. They said, their crystalline form creating prismatic light patterns that many species interpreted as a sign of deep thought. Before the Empire's formation, our region of space was indeed characterized by conflict and instability. However, our records show that these conflicts were primarily between expanding civilizations competing for limited resources. The Empire ended such conflicts by establishing clear territorial boundaries and resource allocation systems. The Elder paused, their form refracting light in increasingly complex patterns. But the humans have demonstrated that territorial expansion is not necessary for continued growth and development. Their civilization has advanced dramatically while confining itself to uninhabited worlds. This suggests that the conflicts we sought to prevent may no longer be inevitable. The statement sent shockwaves through the assembly. If species could develop and prosper without territorial expansion, then the Empire's role as mediator of resource conflicts became questionable. Ambassador Nethin of the Peaceful Gathering stood to speak. Elder Foda raises an important point. The Gathering has been analyzing human space expansion patterns, and we have found something remarkable. In 18 months of independent operation, they have established contact with 43 species. None of these contacts have resulted in conflict. The assembly stirred with interest and concern. Furthermore, Nethin continued, these contacts have included 3 species that were previously unknown to the Empire. The humans discovered and established peaceful relations with entirely new civilizations without central authority or predetermined protocols. General Crix slammed his fist on his speaking platform. Because they are preparing for war. They seek allies against the Empire. Are they? Ambassador Lyrian stood, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. Our intelligence reports indicate that humans have specifically avoided military alliances with any species. They share information, engage in trade, and offer technological assistance, but they do not ask for military support or mutual defense agreements. She activated her delegation's data display. In fact, human behavior suggests they expect to face any imperial military action alone. They are not building a coalition against us. They are demonstrating that coalitions are unnecessary for peaceful coexistence. The debate that followed was unlike anything in the Empire's history. For the first time, member species were openly questioning not just imperial policies, but the fundamental need for imperial authority itself. Ambassador Kethval of the Valish Consortium stood to make a statement that would be remembered as the moment the Empire's crisis became irreversible. The Valish Consortium formally requests clarification of our membership status and the legal procedures for voluntary withdrawal from the Empire. The assembly erupted in chaos. Multiple species began speaking at once, some supporting the Valish request, others condemning it as treason. The translation systems overloaded, trying to process hundreds of simultaneous conversations. Supreme Counselor Thexie called for order, but for several minutes, her voice was lost in the cacophony. When silence finally returned, the damage was clear. The question of voluntary withdrawal, once unthinkable, was now formally before the assembly. The Empire, Thexie said carefully, has never developed procedures for voluntary withdrawal because such withdrawal was never anticipated. Member species join the Empire for protection and mutual benefit. Why would they choose to abandon such advantages? To answer that question, said Dr. Kethvar, the Valish political theorist, we must first determine whether those advantages are real or simply assumed. The Valish delegation activated their own data displays, showing detailed economic analyses. Our preliminary studies suggest that Valish prosperity has increased since joining the Empire, but not necessarily because of Imperial membership. Most of our growth appears to be the result of our own efforts, our own innovations, and our own resource management. The analysis showed trade patterns, technological development, and economic growth over the centuries of Valish membership. The Empire provided us with access to galactic trade networks, but we could have achieved similar access through direct bilateral agreements with other species. The Empire provided us with protection from external threats, but we have never faced any external threats that required Imperial intervention. Dr. Kethvar continued with devastating logic. The Empire provided us with a framework for peaceful coexistence with other species, but the humans have demonstrated that such coexistence can be achieved without surrendering sovereignty to central authority. The implications spread through the assembly like a virus. If one species could question the value of Imperial membership, others could do the same. If the benefits of membership could be achieved through alternative means, then Imperial authority became a matter of choice rather than necessity. Elder Fotha spoke into the growing tension. Perhaps the question we should be asking is not whether species should be allowed to leave the Empire, but whether the Empire should exist at all. The statement was so shocking that the assembly fell completely silent. For a Zephyrian elder, one of the Empire's founding species, to question the Empire's fundamental existence was unprecedented. I do not suggest this lightly, Fotha continued, but the humans have demonstrated that galactic civilization can function without central authority. If this is true, then our Empire may be not only unnecessary, but actively harmful to the long-term development of galactic society. The philosophical earthquake that followed this statement revealed just how deeply the human challenge had shaken the Empire's foundations. Representatives who had never questioned Imperial authority found themselves considering alternatives they had never imagined possible. Meanwhile, in human space, Admiral Chun was dealing with the consequences of their success. The U.S. Endeavor had become a focal point for diplomatic contact, with representatives from Imperial species arriving almost daily to learn about human governmental and economic systems. Dr. Sarah Kim briefed Chun on the latest developments. We're now in contact with 78 Imperial species, she reported. 37 have requested detailed information about transition procedures for achieving independence. 15 have asked about mutual defense agreements. And 6 have formally requested to establish independent trade relationships. Admiral Chun studied the reports with mixed feelings. Their demonstration that alternatives to Imperial authority existed had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. But success was bringing its own problems. The Empire is going to have to respond soon, she observed. They can't allow this level of defection without taking action. What kind of action? Dr. Kim asked. Military intervention is becoming increasingly likely, Chun replied grimly. But not against us directly. If they attack human space, they validate everything we've been saying about the Empire being based on force rather than consent. Instead, they'll probably target species that are trying to leave the Empire. The prediction proved accurate. Within days, reports reached human space that Imperial forces had surrounded the Valish home system and were demanding immediate compliance with Imperial authority. The Valish had committed no acts of aggression, violated no laws, and threatened no one. Their only crime was asking to leave. The crisis was about to become a war, and the nature of galactic civilization would be determined by its outcome. Admiral Chun called an emergency meeting of all human fleet commanders. The Empire has made its choice, she announced. They're using military force against species that want to exercise self-determination. We have a decision to make. The room fell silent as the officers absorbed the implications. Humanity had sought only to be left alone, to exist independently, without threatening anyone. But the Empire's response to their example was proving that peaceful coexistence was not possible under the current system. "What are our options?" asked Captain Rodriguez of the U.S. Defiance. "We can maintain our neutrality and hope the Empire leaves us alone after they crush the independence movements we inspired," Chen said. "Or we can honor our stated principles and defend the right of species to choose their own path." General Patricia Rodriguez, who had arrived from Earth for the emergency conference, stood to address the gathering. "The President has authorized me to inform you that Earth's position is clear. We will not stand by while the Empire uses military force to prevent peaceful self-determination." The decision was made. Humanity would intervene in their first galactic conflict, not to conquer or expand, but to defend the principle that had led them to walk away from the peace talks in the first place: the right of intelligent beings to choose their own destiny. The Empire that had sought to contain humanity was about to discover what humans were truly capable of when they fought not for territory or resources, but for an idea. And ideas, as the Empire was learning, could be far more dangerous than any weapon ever devised. The galaxy was about to change forever, and the species that had simply walked away from a conference table would determine the shape of that change. The Empire's biggest mistake was becoming clear. They had tried to force compliance from beings who valued freedom more than safety, choice more than security. The war that followed would prove which approach to galactic civilization was truly stronger. #Humans walk away from peace talks. Story Part 5. The Battle of Valish Prime lasted exactly 14 minutes and 37 seconds. It marked the beginning and end of the Galactic Empire as the galaxy had known it for over 3 centuries. Admiral Sarah Chun watched from the bridge of the U.S. Endeavour as the Imperial fleet surrounding the Valish homeworld suddenly found itself facing an entirely different kind of warfare than anything they had prepared for. The Empire's massive dreadnoughts and intimidating battlecruisers had been designed to overawe primitive species into submission. They had not been designed to fight against an enemy that treated war as a problem to be solved rather than a contest to be won. Enemy fleet composition, reported Commander Torres from the tactical station. 12 Kethvar dreadnoughts, 36 Gorlak heavy cruisers, 48 escort vessels of various Imperial member species. Estimated total crew of approximately 200,000 beings. The numbers were overwhelming from a traditional military perspective. The human fleet consisted of only 8 ships, the latest generation of Earth's military technology, designed specifically for fighting against superior numbers with maximum efficiency and minimum casualties. "Admiral," came the voice of Captain Yuki Tanaka from the U.S. Resolute. "We're receiving communications from the Imperial fleet. They're demanding our immediate withdrawal and threatening to open fire if we interfere with their police action against the Valish." Chun activated her communications array, broadcasting on all frequencies so that every ship in the system and every monitoring station throughout the galaxy could hear her response. "Imperial Fleet, this is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Autonomous Navy. You are currently conducting military operations against a civilian population whose only action has been to request clarification of their political status. Withdraw immediately, or we will be forced to intervene." The reply came from General Crix himself, his massive form visible on the main display as he broadcast from his flagship. "Admiral Chun, you are interfering with internal Imperial affairs. The Valish Consortium is an Imperial member species engaged in a legal rebellion against lawful authority. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." "General," Chun replied calmly, "the Valish have committed no acts of violence, violated no agreements, and threaten no one. They have simply asked to exercise their right to self-determination. If the Empire considers such requests to be rebellion, then the Empire has revealed its true nature." The philosophical debate might have continued, but Admiral Chun had not come to the Valish system to engage in diplomacy. She had come to demonstrate that the Empire's authority was not absolute, that alternatives existed, and that those alternatives could defend themselves. All ships, she broadcast to her fleet, implement Protocol 7. What happened next would be studied in military academies throughout the galaxy for generations to come. The human fleet didn't charge into battle with weapons blazing. Instead, they simply vanished. The Imperial sensors, designed to track conventional ships moving in predictable patterns, suddenly lost contact with all 8 human vessels. Advanced stealth technology, developed from decades of human military innovation, rendered the human ships effectively invisible to Imperial detection systems. Where did they go? The panicked voice of an Imperial sensor operator could be heard on the emergency frequencies. Find them. General Crix's roar echoed across Imperial communications. They cannot simply disappear. Scan all vectors. Deploy sensor drones. But the humans had learned from centuries of warfare among their own species. They understood that the greatest advantage in battle was not superior firepower, but superior information and positioning. While the Imperial fleet spread out in increasingly desperate search patterns, the human ships moved through their formations like ghosts. The first sign of a human's presence was when the Imperial flagship's primary weapon systems simply stopped working. No explosions, no dramatic damage. The weapons just went offline as human infiltration systems quietly disabled critical components. The second sign was when General Crix's communications with his fleet were replaced by Admiral Chen's voice broadcasting from his own ship systems. General, your fleet is now effectively disarmed. Your weapon systems have been disabled, your command and control networks have been compromised, and your ship's life support systems are under our control. You have 2 options: withdraw immediately or watch as your fleet becomes increasingly helpless. The demonstration was devastating in its implications. The Imperial fleet hadn't been defeated through superior firepower. It had been neutralized through superior technology and tactics. More importantly, the humans had done it without killing a single Imperial crew member. Impossible. Crix roared. Our ships are the most advanced in the galaxy. Our defenses are impregnable. Your ships are impressive, Chen admitted, but they're designed to fight enemies who share your assumptions about warfare. You build weapons to destroy and intimidate. We build weapons to win. As if to emphasize the point, every ship in the Imperial fleet suddenly found its navigation systems redirected. Instead of maintaining their positions around Valish Prime, they began moving in perfect formation toward the edge of the system. What are you doing to our ships? Crix demanded. Sending you home, Chen replied. Your vessels will be returned to Imperial space with all crew members unharmed. Your weapons systems will be restored once you cross the border. Consider this a demonstration of human capabilities and human intentions. The Imperial fleet found themselves physically unable to resist as their own ships carried them away from the Valish system. It was the most humiliating defeat in galactic military history. An entire Imperial battle group rendered helpless without a single shot being fired. But the real impact of the Battle of Valish Prime wasn't military, it was psychological. Throughout the galaxy, species that had lived under Imperial authority for centuries suddenly realized that the Empire could be resisted. The image of absolute Imperial power had been shattered by 8 human ships that had treated the Empire's most advanced fleet like misbehaving children. The news spread through Imperial space faster than light-speed communications could carry it. On worlds throughout the Empire, populations that had never seriously considered alternatives to Imperial membership began asking new questions. If humans could neutralize an Imperial fleet without violence, what else might be possible? On Kethura, Supreme Counselor Thexia convened another emergency session of the Imperial Council. The chamber was barely half full. Many species representatives had mysteriously become unavailable for Imperial business. The humans have humiliated our military forces, she announced grimly. But, more dangerously, they have demonstrated that our authority can be successfully challenged. Ambassador Lyrian, who had remained on Kethura throughout the crisis, stood to address the council. Supreme Counselor, perhaps it's time to consider that our authority should be challenged. The statement sent shockwaves through the remaining delegates. For an Altari, one of the Empire's founding species, to openly question imperial authority was unprecedented. Explain yourself, Ambassador Texa demanded. The humans have forced us to confront a fundamental question, Lyrian replied. Is our authority based on consent or on force? If it's based on consent, then species should be free to withdraw that consent. If it's based on force, then we are not the benevolent protectors we claim to be. Elder Fotha, whose crystalline form had been refracting light in increasingly agitated patterns, spoke for what would be the last time in an Imperial Council session. The humans have revealed the truth we have avoided acknowledging, they said. Our empire was never about protection or cooperation. It was about control. We created a system that required submission and called it civilization. The Elder's form began to pulse with the deep, resonant patterns that indicated a formal declaration. The Zephyrian Collective hereby withdraws from the Galactic Empire, effective immediately. We will seek to establish relations with the human autonomous regions and explore alternatives to Imperial membership. The declaration hit the chamber like a physical blow. The Zephyrians were not just members of the Empire. They were founding members, one of the 3 species that had originally created the Imperial system. Before Thexia could respond, Ambassador Lyrian stood again. The Altari Union also withdraws from the Empire, effective immediately. The cascade had begun. Within hours, 17 more species had followed the Zephyrians and Altari out of the Empire. Within days, the number had grown to over 100. The demonstration at Valish Prime had proven that Imperial authority was not absolute, and species throughout the galaxy were choosing to test their freedom. But the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Dr. Veltam, the Empire's chief xenopsychologist, requested a private meeting with Supreme Counselor Thexia. Supreme Counselor, she said, her mechanical translation unit conveying a sense of urgency. I have completed a final analysis of the Imperial system versus human alternatives. The results suggest that our entire approach to galactic civilization has been fundamentally flawed. Thexia studied the data with growing alarm. Explain. Human civilization is more stable than ours, Dr. Veltam said bluntly. Their voluntary cooperation produces stronger, more lasting alliances than our forced compliance. Their competitive cooperation drives innovation and adaptation better than our imposed uniformity. Their acceptance of conflict and disagreement prevents the kind of system-wide collapses that destroy empires. The analysis was devastating. Are you saying the humans are superior to us? I'm saying their approach to civilization is superior to ours, Dr. Veltam replied. The Empire has created artificial stability by suppressing natural social evolution. The humans have created genuine stability by accepting and channeling natural social forces. She manipulated the data display to show comparative projections. If current trends continue, human civilization will outlast the Empire by centuries, possibly millennia. Their system is designed to adapt and survive. Ours is designed to control and dominate. Thexia looked at the projections with a growing realization that her life's work, the creation and maintenance of the Galactic Empire, had been built on fundamentally flawed assumptions. What would you recommend? She asked quietly. Voluntary dissolution of the Empire, Dr. Veltam replied. Transformation from imposed authority to voluntary cooperation. Allow species to choose their own paths while maintaining communication and trade networks for mutual benefit. The recommendation was tantamount to admitting that everything the Empire had stood for was wrong. But as Thexia looked around the nearly empty council chamber, she realized that the choice was no longer whether to dissolve the Empire. It was whether to dissolve it gracefully or watch it collapse in chaos. Meanwhile, in human space, Admiral Chun was dealing with an unexpected problem. The success of their intervention at Valish Prime had transformed humans from galactic outsiders to the center of a new kind of civilization. We have formal requests for alliance from 37 former Imperial species, Dr. Sarakim reported. They want to join a human-led coalition against the Empire. That's exactly what we don't want, Chen replied. If we become just another empire with different management, we haven't solved anything. President Elizabeth Harrison, participating via quantum entanglement communication from Earth, agreed. Our goal was never to replace the Empire with human authority. Our goal was to prove that central authority isn't necessary. The solution they developed would become known as the Galactic Cooperation Network, not an empire,